Hello everyone, just finished painting another batch of my Zulus and I've already lost them in the midst of this army here, so I can't show you the exact figures I've just finished, but I thought I might be getting close to my target size for my army that I want to use to recreate Rorke's Drift. What I intended to do was to have the 4 regiments that historically were present at the Battle of Rorke's Drift and have, 24 bases per regiment, so 4 figures on a base. 4 times 24 times 4 is, get my calculator out again, 384 figures, plus leaders and commanders and casualty figures and so on. And I knew I was getting quite close, and I've just totted it up, and I am 60 figures short now. So I think what I'll do is try and blitz those all in one go, and then I'm ready to go. And the idea of getting close to 400 figures for the game was that there were about 4,000 Zulus in the force that attacked Rorke Drift. So I thought I could maybe bring them on, bring casualties back on, and so on. Because the frontage of Rorke's Drift, the defences were deliberately shortened and narrowed, and the British were defending a very compact area. It meant that in real life, but also in a war game, you wouldn't be able to get all the Zulus condensed into that small area anyway. So I think around 400 figures will be fine. So I'll zoom in a little bit closer in a moment, just to give you an overall impression of them. They're a real hodgepodge of different ranges, and I've been painting them over such a long time now that my style of painting has changed. The way I represent African flesh has changed dramatically. I used to try and use oils, but I've found a quicker method now that I think I prefer, using foundry paints and a kind of transparent glaze over the top of that, which I think has a better result, and it's not as it doesn't take as long to do, and it doesn't seem to be as vulnerable to wear and tear and scratching and so on either. So I've settled for that method now. What was I saying? Oh yeah, but a real mix of ranges. A lot of redoubt in here, which are slightly larger than average, and then I've got Empress, which I really like. Some foundry figures in there, mainly because I purchased several years ago, quite a long time ago now, a whole bag of colonial figures, unpainted figures from a bring and buy. And there were Zulus in that, so I dipped into that and took out what I could from that to fit into this army. And then I'm finishing off with a lot of Warlord plastics. The plastics, they're good. They are. I do like them. I mean, particularly I've noticed getting all these figures out that the metal figures are very vulnerable. It's very easy to dislodge weapons and shields and so on when you're lifting them, because of the weight and the pressure you have to apply, whereas the plastic figures are a lot more robust. But I do find a number of things. One is that they're in such dramatic poses that I think they're more suited for basing on single bases rather than basing them as I'm doing for black powder. Even though Warlord do sell their Zulu figures in what they describe as their black powder range. I think their figures are far better suited for a set of rules like the Men Who Would Be Kings or something like that. So they don't fit on the bases very well, but they are a lot lighter and more robust. So I've got mixed feelings about the plastics, and also even though you would imagine, because they're sort of multi-part, you would imagine you could get a lot of variants out of them. I found that's not necessarily the case. That I deliberately avoid, or try to now, although there are figures in here that are carrying muskets, I deliberately try to avoid putting muskets on the figures and keeping them constrained to clubs and spears and axes and so on. And when you do that, you find you do begin to limit yourself quite a lot, because some of the arms have cowtails on them, some don't. Some of the arms have a shield and a knobkerrie in the same left hand, and that means you can't put a knobkerrie in the right hand, because then the figure would be carrying two knobkerries. Little things like that, but it does begin to limit you. And I was looking at the Perry plastics, and they do look like a really nice box set. But I've got enough figures now that I need to complete this army, so that's one reason why I'm not tempted by the Perry at the moment. Another is that they do seem to have a lot of muskets and rifles in the selection, and as I say, I'm trying to avoid using those so that I can use the army for earlier periods and even into Zulu conflicts and things like that. And another thing that they do seem to have is a number of casualty figures, and as you'll see as I zoom in a little bit, I'm already well stocked in casualty figures. I don't need any more. So the Perry figures don't tempt me at the moment. Maybe a long term off, I'll get some of them. Right, so before I zoom in then, I'll just give you a brief overview. On this side here, we've got a regiment that have got red shields with white spots, and they represent the, excuse me for murdering the language, but I think that is the Ugloko regiment. And I am 2 bases short on those, so once I've painted up another 8 figures, that regiment will be complete. On this side, I've got the unmarried regiment with black shields, and they are the Ingluwengwe. And I've got more bases. I planned this really badly, but I've actually got 26 bases for them. But I'm not going to repaint the shields and transfer them over to this side. I'm just going to have 2 extra bases. And as I was saying about the muskets, quite a lot of these figures are carrying muskets, so it will enable me to leave them out of the game, or even maybe have them representing the Zulus who were situated on the mountainside, the Oscarberg, firing down on the mission station. And then in the middle and at the back, I've got 2 regiments there that both got very similar coloured shields, which are the Utulwana and the Inglongo. And both those regiments had white shields with either brown or black patches on them. And they are the ones that I am really short on. I need to bash out. I still require 13 bases of those. So that's, what's that, about 52. Yeah, 52 figures I've still got to paint. So I've got to paint 52 of the ones with the white shields and 8 of these ones with the red shields with white spots, and then I'll be there. Right, so let's zoom in a little bit. Show you what I've got. So in the centre is the army commander there, who represents the commander at Rorke's Drift, who was called Dabula Manzi. And he's on horseback, and I've actually got, in some of my textbooks, a picture of Dabula Manzi on horseback. So I thought that was a good figure to represent him. And here's the army commander. Let's try and turn a little bit around now and see what we get. So they are some of the, what do they call those? The glocko, red with white spots. More there. You can see some of the casualty figures there. Zoom in on those a little bit. So these casualty figures here standing about to fall are Empress figures. This pile of dead here, I haven't seen them available any longer. They were from War Games Foundry. I've got 3 groups of that, so they can represent mass casualties. I've also got a lot, I haven't put them all out on the table, but I've got a lot of these just shields put onto bases. So I'm going to use some to represent disorder and some to represent casualty. One lot to represent disorder and one lot to represent casualties. Let's try and keep it at that sort of mag. Just zoom around, give you a general impression. So that's some of the unmarried regiment there. Although the redoubt figures are a lot bigger, when you mix them up like this, it doesn't show quite so dramatically. You've got the 2 regiments with white shields and reddish brown spots at the back there. I think those ones there are some of the Empress figures, which they are my preferred figures, I think. Another pile of War Games Foundry dead. This is another thing that I try and avoid now, is you can see there's an awful lot there of redoubt figures with British jackets on, the red coat jackets. And 2 things about those really is, one is they are presumably meant to represent jackets that are taken off the dead at Isandlwana, and so the figures, any of the warriors who fought at Rorke's Drift bypassed the Battle of Isandlwana, so they wouldn't have jackets like that. So it makes them a little bit unsuitable for Rorke's Drift, but never mind. And the other is that they obviously date them to the 1879 conflict, so it prevents me from using them in earlier games, a game set in earlier periods. But as I say, I've got 2 more bases than I need for the unmarried regiment, so it's not a big problem. So I don't know how long it will take me to paint the other 60, so I'm a very slow painter and I mix all my projects together, so I've got lots of other projects on the go at the moment, but as I say, I think I'll try and put them all in one big batch and paint 60 figures all in one go, rather than kind of keep doing it in little itty bits, and then at the end of that I'll have to start thinking about acquiring a larger playing surface. I'm thinking about buying some fold-up tables or something like that in order to have a big enough playing surface to war game Rorke's using black powder rules. End up with a shot of Dabble Manzi again. There we go. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Bye for now.